Yes.
Yeah.
So I give over to you to present us and to start with the agenda.
Thank you so very much. Good afternoon, everyone listening and watching and participating. I am Tiens Patlamhlaga from the National Research Foundation in Pretoria, South Africa. And with me is Katlego Ralehoko. Maybe you don't seem to see him, but he's here with me. And also on the Netherlands side, on the NWO side, we have Cora, Yakomen, and as well as Mahike. And the purpose of today's connection or talks or deliberations is to look into the call guideline. As you are aware that both the NRF and the NWO have jointly published call for funding of projects. So the agenda for today, as it stands, is that we're going to be looking at the aim of the call and the background of the program, and to indicate to all of you what the general requirements are, as well as the emphasis on the issue of research for impact, because that is one of the key things that will be required of those who will successfully get the funding. Also, we will then lastly open for questions, and we will on both sides attempt to give answers to your different questions. And in the event we are unable to answer all the questions, of course, we'll be available on email to take further your questions. And also we want to refer you to an attachment to the call, which addresses some of the questions, and we refer to that as the frequently asked questions. Having introduced our colleagues, right away we're going to be moving to our presentation. As I have mentioned, the names of the participants from the NRF and the NWO, as you can assumingly see them on the screen: Tiens, Katleo, Cora, Maike, Yakomin, and this forms the team that has been at work to ensure that the call guideline is out there for you to peruse and for you to start jointly applying from South Africa and from the Netherlands. Now, as you may have read already from the call guideline, the aim of this call is to, one, address societal challenges that are but global in nature, so as to increase the societal relevance of their research. Also to enhance and strengthen sustainable research collaboration between the Netherlands as well as South Africa. I hope I'm not too fast, for I was warned yesterday that I have to be a bit slow. Let me now try to be a bit slow and move to the third aim, which is to bring together partners from the Netherlands and from South Africa so they can co-develop, especially the knowledge needed to support the policymakers, as well as for the contribution to societal change. Also to build and connect scientific knowledge and innovative solutions in order to increase the societal impact of research. And again, the other aim of this engagement is to explore new development pathways, and finally to find new ways to accelerate transitions towards sustainable development. I hope I'm still audible and still clear, and I continue to indicate what the bilateral collaboration between the two countries mean to both countries, to say that both the NRF and the NWO have the mandate to ensure that they stimulate long-term research collaborations between researchers in both countries, and also that they strengthen the international position
Oh, no. Hello? We lost you.
Hello?
Yes, we're back.
In transdisciplinary.
It seems we've lost those momentarily. Um,
Teuns, can you hear me? We lost you. Hello, we lost you. Are you back?
Yes.
There you are. Yes.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Thank you. I'm indicating the collaboration between South Africa and the Netherlands to say that both the NWO and the NRF have agreed on strategic knowledge and innovation agendas through a jointly agreed theme-based annual call for proposals, meaning we're looking forward to next year having yet another similar call for proposals. And that funded research projects will have to be in alignment with national research agenda of both countries, as well as, of course, the international initiatives such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as well as ensuring build of bridges between the different research actors in the knowledge chain, fundamental and applied research, as well as scientific disciplines. And as you may be aware that the call focuses mainly on three thematic areas, which are water, food, energy. And this is basically in order to achieve national goals and also to help develop practical innovations and support decisions of policymakers towards sustainable planning and practices, and to ensure strategies and policies, and also to address challenges related to the water, energy, food nexus in the context of a specific region, province, or local municipality, especially in South Africa, and also to build on analytic tools in order to assess resource performance and create a water, energy, food nexus database or inform systems for South Africa. Further, to translate research in order to inform policies in developing options for integrated sustainable resource management, planning and governance. And lastly, to strengthen in a sustainable way access to water, food, energy and related relevant technologies. And the general requirements, which of course apply to both the Dutch and the South African researchers, as you may see, they're the figures that are set aside for the call or for the projects on the Dutch side or on the Netherlands side. 2.047 euros, as well as to note that the consortia that will be formed between the South African and the Dutch PIs should come from a public or private practitioner partner, as well as from historically disadvantaged university. Now, this needs to be emphasized, especially on the South African side, that we know our history, we know where we're coming from. Our institutions of higher learning have been advantaged, some of them, and some have been disadvantaged. So a consortia that will be a reflection of that disparities, or a consortia that would indicate the capacity development, inclusion, especially of those historically disadvantaged institutions, will be highly preferred. Small, medium enterprises, private companies, industries, non-governmental organizations cannot serve as accounting officers or principal investigators, meaning only those applicants based in our 26 universities and museums that are recognized by the NRF for funding can nominate or can have principal investigators. And also, it's important that applicants should adhere to deadlines. And the deadlines, as you can see, the first one being that of the 29th of August, very soon, is that the consortia or the applicants will have to have signed a letter of intent signed by both applicants from South Africa and from the Netherlands. And this is very mandatory. And also the closing date for applications is the 26th of September. But then on the South African side, please ensure that you liaise with your universities and institutions of research to ensure that by the date of the 26th of September, your institutions submit those applications. And I need to emphasize that from the South African point of view, only working researchers, scientists who reside in South Africa and are affiliated with a recognized South African institution of education and research, be it a university or a science council, will be eligible to apply. And that a South African researcher can only act as a PI. And that should be a researcher who comes from any of those listed institutions in the bullet above. And that the researcher from a historically disadvantaged institution should be part of the consortium. And that is, as we said earlier on, that is to an extent very mandatory in order for an application on the South African side to be considered. And that private higher education institutions are not eligible to apply within this program. And that a grant from the NRF, which is historically very high since establishment of our bilateral collaborations, stands at 500,000 or 5.2 million. And that will be dispatched in installments, as you know, the operatives from the NRF. And the part of this budget will be used to cover, or must be used to cover, or the part of the budget by the grant from the NRF, I beg your pardon, must follow the norms and regulations of the NRF. Here we're talking of issues of reporting annually and also through your institutions adhering to financial policies, and also ensuring that the core applicant is a participant in the consortium, and also that they will receive funding through the principal investigator and is a researcher from one of the South African institutions, as I highlighted earlier on. And that the co-applicant will have to also themselves obviously have a contract of employment that will last the duration of the project.
Okay.
Now I hand over to my colleagues from the NW side to take over and speak on requirements from the Netherlands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toons. Yeah, so on the Dutch side, the requirements from the Netherlands, as stated in the call for proposals, is that the principal investigator needs to be a senior researcher from one of the eligible research institutes mentioned in the call for proposal. Like on the South African side, they need to have an employment contract for the duration of the project, and they should have a PhD or equivalent. And the equivalent refers to, for example, some US universities have research doctorates that aren't PhDs but are equivalent to. If you think this may be an issue for you, please contact us and we can give you a list of what those are. There is an exemption for researchers on a tenure track at a university. Universities of applied science are welcome to apply, but as a co-applicant. They cannot be main applicants in this call. So if you are a University of Applied Science or a HBO, please make sure that you work with a university that meets the criteria for principal investigator. From NWO, a maximum of 700,000 can be requested. And this should be requested to conform the budget modules that are specified in the call for proposals. And yes, so the NWO grant rules are applicable to the project budget part that is covered by the NWO grant. And we're trying to go to the next slide, but it's not quite working. There we go. So the criteria that your project will be assessed on, that your application will be assessed on, are threefold. So quality of the research proposal, quality of the consortium, and potential scientific and or societal breakthroughs. All three of these criteria have been operationalized in the call for proposals, so please do have a good look at them while writing your application to see what they entail and what you will be judged on. All three of these criteria will carry equal weight, so they will all account for 1/3 of your overall final score. And then quickly, some more information on the selection procedure. So first of all, as Toons mentioned, it is very important that you submit a letter of intent. This must be signed by the Dutch and the South African principal investigators and submitted to our email address by 2 o'clock on the 29th of August. We won't perform an eligibility procedure on this letter of intent other than it being submitted on time and signed by the right people. But we will, for example, look at your letter and see if, for example, you're missing a consortium member. We'll write back to you and say, hey, please note that before you submit your full application, you need to make sure you have one of these consortium members, or you're missing this currently. So it's more really of a way to see how many people are interested and to give you any pointers on that if necessary. All applications that we receive after being checked for eligibility will be submitted to external reviewers. These external reviewers will write an anonymous report on your application. All these review reports will be made available to the Dutch principal investigator, and it is then his or her responsibility to share these reports with the other applicants, and the consortium as a whole should draft a response to the reports together. So your review reports, your application, and your response to the review reports will all be submitted to an international advisory committee who will formulate the final funding advice to NWO and NRF. And based on that funding advice, NWO and NRF will then take a decision on funding.
Well, so now it's my turn to take over. Thank you, Mike and Toon. As was already explained, research for impact is really in the center of attention of this call for proposal. So this means that we have developed a whole approach for that. And in your application, you are requested to pay some attention to this approach related to your research project. And I'm about to explain to you what the ideas are behind this approach and what the approach entails. Now, the starting point is that societal relevance of research does not come about automatically. You have to do something for it. And what is being done does not mean that the quality of research is less. That is what we often hear, but it goes actually hand in hand. Societal relevance should be prepared and made happen, as it were. We can give you an example of NWO-WOTRO funded research directed at societal relevance, where we have asked a report to be written about the output of our research, because we often heard that our research would probably be less scientifically excellent as it was so much focused on societal impact. Well, the contrary is the case, because publications of WOTRO are cited 43% more often and in journals with 30% higher impact. And 16% of the WOTRO articles belong to the top 10% publications of their domain. So this is for us a proof that scientific and impact excellence actually reinforce each other. What are the aspects of research relevance that we assume? We mean our general assumptions in working along these lines is that the distinction between fundamental and applied research is not always very fruitful because they are not opposites. They are like a continuum and touch upon each other very often. Another assumption is that to address societal challenges, this is best done in inter- and transdisciplinary research and not in disciplinary environments. And we also assume that other types of knowledge beyond academic knowledge are valuable too. Well, to get about this research for impact, an integrated approach has been developed that is explained in the call and that you are also asked to address in your proposal. The first is about co-creation by transdisciplinary teams. The second is to develop a theory of change accompanied by an impact pathway and which should be supported by an impact strategy. That entails knowledge sharing and research uptake. And I will go into each of these elements now after this slide, but the very important aspect is here that you have to start this approach towards impact from your proposal development onwards. What does this mean? That's already when writing your proposal now, you have to sit together with all the people of your project, including societal partners. Now, there are different types of knowledges, and it is also possible to look at this in different ways. But what I present here is from the Handbook of Transdisciplinary Research from Hirsch, Hardon et al. 2007, and they identified 3 types of knowledge that you're actually dealing with all of it in your research. That is the more systemic knowledge to address questions that are more fundamental to the issue that you are looking at. Then there is the target knowledge that explains the need for change and the desired goals and how this could best be reached, and based on a learning process. And then there is transformation knowledge. And this addresses really the means of how to act and transform through technical, social, legal, cultural, and other means. So these 3 different types of knowledge mean that you in your project will work on different levels of knowledge production. Now, as I explained before, what you are asked to do is to write a theory of change and an impact pathway. And a theory, you start with a theory of change based on your project. You have a project with objectives that you want to reach, you know what methodology you want to use, or you are thinking about it. And then how does that research that you are looking at, how does that work towards change? Well, in a theory of change, you especially articulate the assumptions about the process through which you envision the change. And it specifies the ways in which all of the required outcomes related to the long-term goal that you are looking at, how they will be brought about and documented as they occur, according to definition, according to Anderson. Now, assumptions are vital because we all make assumptions without sometimes even realizing it. And the good thing about a transdisciplinary setting is that it's always easier to look at assumptions from others, people from other disciplines, people from societal partners when they look at researchers. It's easier to look at assumptions. So this is really something that you can work on together as a team. Assumptions can relate to cause-effect relations, to paradigms that you use or think are most useful, to worldviews and beliefs as they operate in society, to the context you are working in. You presume things about the context, and also to the strategy you use and the implementation. And these assumptions are actually the basis of your theory of change, because if you do not pay attention to assumptions, you can be quite naive about what you are trying to reach. To put it all together, this theory of change and impact pathway is the way you work actually on your project and how you develop your proposal. You start by looking at the problem you are going to address. What is this problem? What do you think are the causes of this problem? And there you already look at the assumptions, because what you see as causes comes about from certain assumptions. Then you go take the next step. What are the underlying knowledge-related causes? And of course, this is also why you address assumptions. The next step you take is you look at the context analysis, research questions and design, and your theory of change, so that you can develop your project activities and with a risk assessment. This is the basis of your work. Now, when you are working in your impact pathway, you go from output to outcome to impact. But when you write your proposal, you usually start by formulating the impact. That is the long-term goal you want to reach. And then you go back to the outcome and the output that you need to reach that goal. And also here you have assumptions. Certain outputs will lead to certain outcome, will lead to certain impact. What is most crucial about an impact pathway is that it is revised and adjusted throughout your research. Because obviously you are submitting a proposal now. Your research will start much later. But also while you are doing your research, you might find that certain problem areas have changed, that the context has changed, that you have more information to know that the causes you thought were actually accurate for your problem to be addressed are not that relevant as you thought, which means this also has an influence on how you create your impact pathway. So the most significant thing of an impact pathway, that it is part of a learning process that you should do along doing your research with your project team. Now, to go mention some assumptions, as we also, as a program and call, have to address about the water energy food nexus. We assume that for you, that this nexus is a suitable framework to reach the national goals in our two countries, and that its implementation can be strengthened. We also think that stakeholders see the link between this nexus and the policy priorities related to poverty and also the SDGs, I should add. We also presume that this nexus, this link between the three aspects, is also in the mind of actors that we engage in the research, and that it is important to look at this nexus from a regional and local perspective. And also that a database around this WEF nexus or an information system can help South Africa implement as a framework to achieve their national goals. So these are the assumptions connected to the program. And for you as a project in your impact pathway, it is very important to not just relate to your own project, but to link that project to the overall aims and foci of this call, as have been previously explained. So the assumptions on program level, you can address them. You can also criticize them, of course. We have developed a research framework, as you have perhaps written already read in the call for proposals. And we know, obviously, that these assumptions are not always necessarily the case, but these are actually, it's the environment, the assumptions that we would need to work on. And one of the first assumptions is that the interests of consortium partners and stakeholders are aligned. The second assumption is that actors from policy and practice are willing and able to be informed by knowledge, and that this knowledge will also be used in their decision making. We also presume that more knowledge leads to application of that knowledge, and that collaboration between various partners leads to synergies, and that interests and worldviews of partners align. Obviously, we know that this is often not automatically the case, and that projects need to work to achieve these assumptions. They are not just out there. And also, we presume that engagement of stakeholders leads to better research uptake, and that stakeholders are well organized and part of well-functioning institutions. Now we know that there are often maybe different interests between stakeholders, and that stakeholders are not always well organized. So these assumptions are also part of something that you will have to look at in your selection of stakeholders, or in your, at least your analysis of stakeholders. Now, as I already mentioned, the impact pathway during your research goes from output to outcome to impact. But when writing your proposal, it works the other way around. You go from impact to outcome to output. It's important to think about the definitions. What do we mean by output, outcome, and impact? And the difficulty here is that when we talk about output normally, we think about list of publications. Well, in an impact pathway, we do not mean a list of publications or activities. We mean the insights in those publications or in those activities. So output is about the new insights that your research projects has contributed to. Outcome is about change in behavior, relationships, actions, and activities of stakeholders. So change did you achieve with your output? Now, that change is not easy to come by. And we also know that a project can never be responsible for changing somebody else, but you can be responsible for setting the steps, for doing the activities to at least influence that change. Because the gap between output and outcome is a rather huge gap, we have included intermediate research outcomes. And those mean the positive steps that stakeholders take, even though they did not change their behavior yet, but they are interested, they attend your workshops, they want to know more. And then ultimately the big picture change, the research impact, we do realize that this is not often the case within the 3 years period of your project. Sometimes it is, but not always. But it is something that you really have to be conscious of when you work on your output and outcome. Now, also research outcome is sometimes used in the way of research results, but that's not what we mean here. We really mean changes that you bring about, the influence that you have. To give an example of output from a totally different country, and this is from a reporting from Bangladesh, a smartphone app. So what we would not want as output is just a list of, we have done this innovation, we have a smartphone app. But what we are interested in is the story and the insight behind it. And in this case, the story behind is that how this smartphone app could be used better by illiterate farmers, and how they could change the app in such a way that it helped to increase food security for poor and vulnerable women, children, and men. So when you are thinking about output, it is not we have developed a smartphone app. The output is a story behind developing such an app. How did we do it, and what did it result in? And this app sent irrigation advice not only to farmers, but also to providers in such a way that also illiterate farmers could use it. Now, an intermediate outcome is when you, for instance, this is an example from, let me see, Bangladesh again, I think. Yes. I hope that next year we will have, in the next call, examples from the first call from South Africa. So when in this project in Bangladesh, they were consulting farmers, and the project succeeded in creating awareness among the farmers on the importance of having mangroves in their ponds. And also they mobilized different stakeholders to interest them in this building with nature. So they organized 2 knowledge sharing workshops where several high officials attended, and over 150 stakeholders from various backgrounds. Now, why do we call this an intermediary outcome? We do not know yet whether they will really take up all these interests and advice, but they have shown their interest. So that's why it's an intermediate outcome. And when it's an outcome, it means that people already make a change, that they already apply what a new knowledge they have gained, or their interest is not only interest, but they implement it. And that is the example of an outcome in the story of change from northern Uganda, where she was part of farmers who did trials, who were interested in trials and demonstrations by the projects, and who followed trainings and also about marketing of sesame. And through the project, she could increase her sesame farming knowledge and increase her harvest and also her marketing. So she could improve her production and thereby improve her income. So this is a clear outcome example. And I hope these examples will help you to realize what outcome and output and the difference is. And of course, you will receive this information afterwards. Now, outcomes have possible dimensions. They can be conceptual changes, changes in ways of thinking, of raising awareness. They can be instrumental changes, so a policy or an intervention changes, a practice changes like we saw in the sesame seed, or there are different pathways for implementation. Outcome also includes capacity development to build capacity of stakeholders to use their research finding and evidence. And this is often done by training, for instance, of stakeholders where they are not only trained, but they are able to use what they have learned in the training. Now, you are asked next to this impact pathway to develop a research uptake strategy. And you will see in the proposal also that there are 4 main strands and that you are asked to relate to each of these strands, which means that you are asked to write about what stakeholders, who do you want to engage as stakeholders, what capacity development do you envision for these stakeholders in your project, what communication do you have for the outreach of your project? And you are asked for the monitoring and evaluation of your research uptake, your impact strategy, and including your impact pathway. Now, research uptake has, to simplify the matter, has 2 different circles, as we call it. The inner circle are the consortium partners and the stakeholders really closely related to your project. The outer circle are wider networks of possible interested parties and stakeholders, and you can relate to them both. What is also very important, again, about your impact strategy, what are your assumptions, for instance, about capacity development? When you develop a training, what are your assumptions about what stakeholders will need or how they are able to improve their capacity? And to be a little bit more precise about the 4 main strands, you can, of course, read it back in the proposal. Stakeholder engagement is very important to invest in. It's not something that will automatically happen, and most of all, it will also not always be there when you just wrote your proposal. It's something you have to work, you have to build these relationships. And capacity development is also related to both the inner circle and the outer circle of stakeholders, but it will need different ways of doing so. Communication, you have to really think very well through how you make your research results available, not just for the happy few of your consortium and the close stakeholders, but also on a wider scale. And again, monitoring and evaluation is about revision of your research from what you learned by doing your research uptake. To bring it all together in one, as it were, view, you see that the output is in your sphere of control. This is what we expect you to do as a project. We also expect you to work and provide your input for the sphere of influence, the outcome. We expect you to kind of lay the grounds for outcomes to happen. And then the sphere of interest is the impact. That is what we love to see, but we know we cannot always influence it. Sometimes we can. And your output, outcome, and impact are operating in this whole framework of knowledge co-creation within your consortium and with nearby stakeholders. And with your research uptake that goes beyond your project into bigger spheres of influence and interest.
So just to briefly again go through the timeline. So as you can see, 29th of August, 2 o'clock is the deadline for your letter of intent. 26th of September is the deadline for full proposals. Then between October and December, we will be consulting the external reviewers. This means that you can expect the requests for a response to the review reports in January. The International Advisory Committee will then look at your review reports, your application, and your response in a meeting in February. And in March, there will be a decision by the WOTRO Steering Committee and by the NRF RISA executives, and we'll be communicating the decision to you. Projects are then required to start by the end of June 2020.
Now we start with the questions from the chat room. Do we give back to South Africa for a moment?
Thank you. I need to check if there are questions. I haven't received any so far. Colleagues from South Africa.
I see there are some people typing.
Yes, some people started typing.
Yeah.
So please send us your questions either now in the chat room, or obviously you can always email us.
Yeah. What is perhaps also good to know is that you will be receiving the PowerPoint presentation after the webinar as well, and a recording of this webinar will be made available online should you wish to look at it again in your own time. Yeah. So,
I see there are some questions that are displayed.
I would say,
wait.
Yes, when questions are very practical, perhaps we can answer them by email better.
Maybe if your question is very specific for your case, we might be able to better answer you via email. But if you have a general question regarding, for example, theory of change, if there was something in the research for impact approach that you didn't understand, this is a great chance to ask those kinds of questions.
And also just for participants to remember that we have attached together to the call for proposals the frequently asked questions that you can always refer to, and some of those may be covered in the questions that you may be having.
Ja, moeten we alle drie de WEF-dingen analyseren? Ik zal eventjes...
But I see a question that says, do they have to cover the water, energy, and food nexus, meaning all the aspects of that? But I'm sure Mike and colleagues would agree that the proposal has to cover and focus on one area. If you focus on water, then your proposal should be on water. If it's energy, then energy. Food, then you focus on food.
Yes, but it is within that nexus perspective, obviously.
Yes, you do not look at water or energy and food as an isolated item. So you have to look at it from a certain perspective. And that is the Nexus perspective.
But obviously we can imagine that one of these might feature more heavily than one of your other.
Yeah.
Ik zag net ook in over research uptake. Okay. Maar ik kom even aan leven. Ik kom naast jullie. Yeah. I saw a question about the research uptake, so let me look at it.
Kijk hoor. Er zijn heel veel.
Ja.
Ik heb gezien het groter te maken.
Nou, het was verder naar boven, denk ik. Hier. Stakeholder.
Bij Lisa Scholten.
What if stakeholder analysis and analysis of behavioral situation problems to address is part of the research? Shall we describe how we will do this, or do we need to have it defined at proposal stage? I'm not sure what you mean by the question. What do you mean define? I hope that Lisa Scholte will come back, because you have to both analyze it, but you also have to work it out in your impact pathway and your impact approach.
May I come in? I see there are two questions that I may attempt to answer.
Of course.
One of them relate to who signs the letter of intent. And I suppose the answer is that both principal investigators, one from the South African side and one from the Dutch side, should be signatory to that letter.
Yes.
The other question comes from Jackie from University of the Western Cape, who says, as an extraordinary professor and not salaried, may I become the principal investigator? Jackie, I think we had an exchange of emails previously almost on this matter. The answer primarily would be that if you have a contract with UWC and the contract extends to the duration of the project, and UWC's research office are the ones who will have to validate and consent to your application. So for the NRF, we depend on validation from UWC of your application, because it is UWC who will ultimately submit your application to the NRF.
Okay. We saw a question as well regarding PhD students, and if your university in the Netherlands won't pay for the 4th year, if the PhD student can instead be appointed in South Africa and still be paid from the NWO grant. This is possible if the PhD student is appointed in South Africa and the PhD program there is 3 years. Obviously, in this case, the PhD student should not be salaried according to the VSNU tables, so the Association of Dutch Universities, but according to the local going rates for the 3 years. If you are appointing a PhD student in the Netherlands, because in the Netherlands it's a 4-year program, usually the PhD, the university will need to provide a guarantee that there will be funding for that 4th year of the PhD.
Yes, I have a question about how far do we engage with stakeholders now during the proposal development, co-development of proposal? Well, that obviously depends on your research. It also depends whether you have some societal partners in your consortium. Obviously, you will have to work very closely with them. But we can also imagine that you work with some stakeholder representatives or some societal organizations who know a lot about the the theme of your research or the locality of your research, so that you can already engage them in when developing your proposal. So I would say as much as is possible, it would be good, because you can already make steps that you otherwise would have to do afterwards. But we do realize it is not that easy in such a limited period.
There is a question that says, from a gender perspective,
Yes.
to what extent does the proposal take care of these issues? May I respond from the South African point of view to say issues of gender, just as much as I alluded to earlier on in terms of historically disadvantaged institutions and individuals, if there is a strong indication of gender issues, especially on issues where women are favorably taken into the research, especially in terms of students and other consortia participants, that particular proposal, of course, will stand a very good chance of getting better recognition in terms of the South African side consideration of the female and historical individual participants are concerned.
I saw that Lisa came back about the stakeholder and behavioral analysis, that it could be a work package. She asked, should it be a work package? Well, there is also a different question about your impact strategy. So there you have to address it in the proposal. And you could make it into a work package. Not necessarily. It depends on how you set up your research and how you design your work packages. But it is at least a very important part of your proposal, and someone or some persons in your team should be responsible for addressing these issues.
There was also another question on from Kevin. Can we be clear that the challenge of this project is to integrate the water, energy, food nexus rather than emphasizing one element with indirect links to the other two elements? This is correct. It is more focused on the WEF nexus. We understand that you may, that in your proposal, one of these may feature more heavily than the other, but it is really focused on the nexus perspective, as it mentions in the thematic focus. So not just the food proposal or just the water proposal, but really this integration of the three.
But one element can be more pronounced than the others, obviously.
Yes, because maybe that you're more of an expert in one than the other.
Another question, I guess, comes from South Africa, of course, is around the budget, whether in the budget they should include value-added tax. I know some of our research councils, whether CSIR or Agricultural Research Council, issues of indication of VAT are very critical. But what we are saying to our applicants is that the allocation that we give to successful applicants, it will be entirely up to them to make provision for that particular VAT based on the financial policies of their own institutions. So if we are allocating 5.2 million, that is inclusive of what you are going to have to put aside for value-added tax. But that should be adjudicated through your institutional financial processes.
There's also a question regarding the involvement of PhD students from abroad to enhance our knowledge on cognitive musicology. Will the project fund a few international students? I think we need a little bit more information to be able to give an entirely accurate answer. In short, if these PhD students are appointed at either a South African or a Dutch university, that is, of course, possible, that they may be recruited from abroad. If these are more sort of, their knowledge is used for like a shorter period of time, in any case through the NWO grant, there is the possibility of the money follows cooperation module. So if you can argue in your proposal that this knowledge is not available in the Netherlands or South Africa, or at least not in the Netherlands, but that you need to use the knowledge of these PhD students from abroad, you are welcome to apply for their salaries via that module, or to hire their knowledge via that module.
But this is a question that you would prefer to email us about.
Yes, that might be easier, so we
With
can
more
see exactly.
information.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we can see exactly what your position is and what the idea is behind these PhD students, so we can give a better information.
There is a comment that says it is very hard to understand what the gentleman is saying. I'm not sure in terms of answering a particular question or that I am not so audible. However, I'm going to allow the person who made the comment to be specific in terms of their comment. In the meantime, I'm going to answer the question that says, in the event universities are in the process of signing memorandum of understanding, what does that mean for the applications? What is required from the call guideline from the collaborating principal investigators is that the two of them, more than their universities, they should sign the letter of intent, the letter which will be indicating their willingness to work together as a consortia or as a consortia leaders between the Netherlands and South Africa. So it's not necessarily a memorandum of understanding at the university's level. That is not what is required from this call text. But a declaration between the two researchers on this side of South Africa and on the Netherlands side to say we are going to work together in doing the research project.
There is also, again, a question about the signing of the letter of intent. So the letter of intent only needs to be signed by the Dutch and South African principal investigators. It is helpful if you mention the rest of your consortium in your letter of intent, especially as we mentioned, if we see in your letter of intent, for example, that, hey, you haven't quite got a societal partner in there yet, we can just point this out to you beforehand, which is just good for you to know if you still have a month. But it only needs to be signed by the Dutch and South African principal investigators. I think the MOU question may also relate to the letter of commitment that's asked for at the university level. This is just a letter from your faculty saying that you are indeed, that they're aware that you submitted this application and that you are indeed given the time to do this research project if it is funded. There's a format for both the letter of intent and the letter of commitment in the call for proposals that you can use for these.
There's a South African question that says if the proposal envisages a role of South African researcher, but the NRF does not pay for their time, can the person be paid from his for his time from the Netherlands side? What happens? Remember, we are governed by Auditor General, the Public Financial Management Act, and the universities have their own financial policies. So what happens in South Africa must be paid in South Africa, and what happens in the Netherlands should also be paid in the Netherlands. So I would urge that in the event there is a further question around this, an email can be sent
directly to me.
Yes, another question that could best be asked via email. We saw another question.
The same proposal to be submitted to NRF and NWO.
Yes, it's the same proposal that has to be submitted to NWO and NRF. And but at NWO, it has to be submitted by the Dutch principal investigator, and at NRF by the South African principal investigator.
And at NWO through the ISAC system.
Yes, through ISAC.
Mandatory.
Yes, and we should point out that ISAC will take you some time as a system, also because you will need to record in ISAC who your co